Indulge me for a few while I catch everyone up. Sega, born in America, raised in Japan, had grown from a simple coin-operated amusement machine distributor to a strong contender in the home entertainment market. By the mid-90s, they had accomplished what few had thought possible. They provided a viable alternative to Nintendo hardware. The tight battle between the Genesis and the SNES led to a home gaming renaissance, with plenty of classics available on both systems. But the large selection of sports titles, thanks mostly to Electronic Arts, and content that skewed more mature, made Sega's hardware the choice for older gamers. The introduction of expensive add-ons, turning an elegant piece of hardware into an abomination of black plastic, proved detrimental to Sega's long-term success. Both the Sega CD and the 32X were attempts to prolong the life of the Genesis hardware, but the inevitable lack of quality titles and their relatively short market lifespans left many consumers miffed. Sega moved into the next generation bereft of much of the ferocity that served them well in the early days of the Genesis. The sloppy launch of their 32-bit Saturn in 1995 ended with them falling well behind both Nintendo and console newcomers Sony, both of whom beat out Sega's new hardware on price and content. The Saturn was performing okay in Japan, but that still didn't keep the company from posting a net loss of $328 million in 1998. Sega pulled the plug on the console in North America early that same year to focus attention towards their next and last hardware venture, the Dreamcast. And that's what we'll be discussing on today's second episode of Osborne's Reloaded. Even after all its prior missteps and the resulting consumer trepidation, Sega managed to generate a healthy buzz leading up to the release of the Dreamcast. It helped that they seemed to be fulfilling the wishes of both gamers and developers. Recognizing the complexity of the Saturn's architecture, Sega simplified the new console. Drawing inspiration from PC hardware, the Dreamcast utilized off-the-shelf parts while running a custom version of Windows CE. Theoretically, PC ports would be painless. Seriously with those P sounds? For media storage, they opted for a proprietary GD-ROM format which had a capacity of 1.2 gigabytes. While not as roomy as the then pricey DVD technology, it was still roomier than the 700 megabytes found on standard CD-ROMs. Hoping to expose more citizens to the wonders of online gaming, Sega included a 56K modem on every Dreamcast, making it the first console with internet connectivity out of the box. And of course, the visuals for its time were quite fetching. The Dreamcast was essentially a scaled-down version of Sega's NAOMI arcade system boards. Same CPU, graphics, and sound chips, just less memory across the board. That NAOMI hardware, introduced in 1998 and used all the way up until 2009, powered some of not only Sega's finest offerings, but also offerings from distributors such as Namco and Capcom, who licensed the technology. The hardware similarity between NAOMI and the Dreamcast allowed for effortless home ports of these titles that were virtually indistinguishable from their arcade counterpart. The Dreamcast did have one huge omission: Electronic Arts. The company, one of Sega's most important third-party allies in the 16-bit days, declined to support the system. Details as to why vary. One theory blames Sega's decision to use an unknown manufacturer for their chipset. Sega had originally planned on using the more well-known 3DFX, a company in which Electronic Arts was an investor. But during their initial public offering, 3DFX disclosed its contract with Sega ahead of any formal announcement. This left an angry Sega no choice but to sever the deal. Electronic Arts claimed the actual reason for their defection was Sega's inability to offer them an acceptable royalty deal. Meanwhile, Sega maintains that EA was insistent on being the only company producing sports titles for the system, even though Sega already invested $10 million in visual concepts to produce first-party alternatives. Regardless of the true reason, the loss of Electronic Arts, by then one of the most profitable third parties, put Sega at a terrible disadvantage.
Dreamcast テレビ CM
懸賞って当たらないもんですね。
そんなあなたにハンカチ落としキャンペーン。ドリームキャストを電話線につなぐだけで1分に1人当たりのメールが届くんです。
本当？
しかも
The Dreamcast hit Japanese stores in 1998. Sales were disappointingly tepid, partially because of a manufacturing defect that severely cut their anticipated launch day supply. But the bigger problem was a lack of compelling software. Only 4 titles were available at launch, and the delay of high-profile games like Sonic Adventure did not help. But like its predecessor, the North American release would go the exact opposite way.
This is the day you have trained for, the day you have studied for. Utilize your superior skills.
Launched in North America on 9999 for 199, the Dreamcast set both pre-order and first-day sales records. Sega actually earned a spot in the Guinness Book of World Records for most revenue generated in the entertainment industry in a 24-hour period, though that does seem overly specific. While the low price tag for next-gen hardware was a big selling point, having 19 different launch titles from which to choose didn't hurt either. Sega's Hedgehog mascot finally made the transition to a proper 3D game with the well-received Sonic Adventure. Those looking for unique fighting titles had Capcom's Power Stone and Midway's Ready to Rumble Boxing. Arcade fans had Hydro Thunder, House of the Dead 2, and Mortal Kombat 4, called Mortal Kombat Gold, available to them. However, the launch game that really stood out on the Dreamcast was its port of Namco's Soul Calibur. The quality gap between arcade and home version had been officially slammed shut on the day of Soul Calibur's release. Namco's weapons-based fighter actually surpassed its coin-op counterpart in both graphics and content. While players can enjoy the traditional fighting game modes found in arcades, there's also a robust mission mode that has you complete several challenges with various objectives. It also looked and sounded amazing, with fluid animations, sweeping music, and lush backdrops bringing battles to life. Soul Calibur was a critical success, earning straight 10s from Electronic Gaming Monthly, an honor that only a handful of other games received. Soul Calibur became the Dreamcast's killer app, and showed that polygon graphics had finally matured past the point where they no longer looked freakishly off-putting. Indeed, the Dreamcast hit the ground running. For a while it seemed like North America was ready to fall in love with Sega all over again. But those who were able to score a console during the launch window discovered they would have trouble saving their in-game progress. This was because Sega's quirky little visual memory units were ridiculously sparse throughout the end of 1999. Cheaper third-party options were available, but the lack of an LCD screen made it a very sad substitution. The visual memory unit, henceforth VMU, was a tiny monochromatic handheld that worked independently of the console for playing simplistic minigames. In Sonic Adventure, for example, you were able to obtain eggs that could be stored on the VMU to play Chow Adventure, a digital pet-type game not unlike Tamagotchi. While plugged into your controller, the tiny screen would often display cute little animations specific to the game you were playing. It even served as a second screen for some titles, such as secret plate choosing in NFL 2K or providing your health stats in Resident Evil Code Veronica. You could even connect two of them for some steamy VMU on VMU action. Besides the giant leap in graphics, the strong launch library, and the wallet-friendly price, the console also happened to look quite handsome. Its compact design is an orgy of geometric shapes, a sleek white square, littered with various circles, held together by a triangle, all of it overseen by an innocent-looking spiral. The Dreamcast is an aesthetic wonderland. The controller isn't as snazzy. An offshoot of their previous analog controller for the Saturn, its resemblance to the Starship Enterprise has not gone unnoticed by others more clever than myself. But it is quite comfortable. The shoulder triggers have the right amount of travel, and the face buttons are arranged in the highly effective diamond shape. Each controller comes with slots for two add-ons, typically a memory card and a rumble pack, but also things like a microphone so you could talk to your seaman. And though the cord comes out the bottom, the designers were kind enough to add a little indentation on the back to reroute it to the more traditional top, thus avoiding a huge minor annoyance. Another keen feature of the console was the aforementioned 56K modem. The Dreamcast was not the first console to be able to connect to a remote network. Mattel's Intellivision had the play cable service way back in 1981, for example, but it was the first to include it as a standard feature. And Sega, cognizant of the impending proliferation of broadband, had the foresight of making it modular, allowing users to upgrade with ease. The Dreamcast also had available for purchase a separate mouse and keyboard, even a VGA adapter if you want to hook it all up to a sharper PC monitor. Fire up the web browser disk and you'll be scrolling through your favorite GeoCities sites in no time. Possibly one of the oddest peripherals available for the Dreamcast would have to be the Maraca controllers. Made specifically for their home port of Samba de Amigo, they were quite pricey at $100 a set, but they were also quite innovative. A precursor of sorts to the Wii motion controls, they were able to detect the height of your maracas as you vigorously shook them in time to corny Ricky Martin tracks. With a solid library that grew with a second wave of games in 2000, including the arcade smash Crazy Taxi, Sega was poised to experience a resurgence in popularity not unlike their Genesis heyday. But their momentum was hitting some devastating potholes. Sega's efforts were being overshadowed by the hype for Sony's PlayStation 2 console. And while new hardware from Nintendo was to be expected, it was Microsoft's announcement of their entry into the console fray that surprised everyone. Sega was now faced with the position of having 3 fierce competitors, when 2 was proving more than enough trouble. An interesting side note about Microsoft: there was a small window of opportunity for their original Xbox to be a sequel of sorts to the Dreamcast. Microsoft was in talks to buy Sega, which would have afforded the new kid on the console block a healthy assortment of exclusive IPs. However, Microsoft refused to allow backwards compatibility with existing Dreamcast titles, while Sega didn't want to have to work with Windows-bloated APIs. As you probably already guessed, nothing came of those talks. Although many had anticipated Sega would be cutting the price of their Dreamcast come 2000, this did not happen. Sega instead decided to give it away for free. Well, kinda. Anyone who subscribed to the $22 a month SegaNet for a commitment of 2 years would get a $200 rebate good towards a Dreamcast, and also a free keyboard. While the Dreamcast did have online play with Choo Choo Rocket, a fun multiplayer cat and mouse game from Sonic Team, there wasn't too much else to take online.
Fastest hunting plus best clan crushing plus most mammoth burgers equals SegaNet. Is that simple enough? Good.
The SegaNet platform would usher in new, online-friendly titles, such as the 2K1 Sports lineup, Quake 3 Arena, and Phantasy Star Online, as well as facilitate connections between players as smoothly as their creaky old phone lines would allow. Also planned was a specialized VMU that would double as a player for those newfangled MP3s everyone was raving about. The device, planning to sell for about $100, was to have 64 megabytes of internal memory and direct access to mp3.com to download tracks. The device never made it to store shelves, and that's kind of a bummer. I feel like I'd still be rocking that thing on the way to work had it come out. Even with all that was going right for the Dreamcast, software sales were somewhat unremarkable. Piracy can take some of that blame. Sega did a poor job of preventing unauthorized copies of games from playing on their hardware. There was security in place, no doubt, but it was easily circumvented without any sort of hardware modification. Soon after release, new games were ripped, minor changes were made to bypass security and allow the contents to fit within the space of a standard CDR, and finally uploaded for the masses. Sega hoped that a new, ambitious title by Yu Suzuki, creator of several seminal Sega titles, really, with that S, such as Outrun, Hang-On, and Virtua Fighter, would turn software sales around. The game, entitled Shenmue, was envisioned as a multi-part cinematic story of revenge and menial tasks. The end result was a multi-disc epic that was rife with lush environments and never-before-seen realism, perfectly captured mid-80s Japan, as far as I know. Shenmue pioneered the sandbox genre, a large, non-linear open world that players can explore outside of the standard objectives. It also helped popularize QuickTime events as a way of giving players interactivity during cinematic events. Shenmue was a critical success and went on to become one of the console's best-selling games, but since the cost of making it was somewhere in the park of $47 to $70 million, easily the most expensive game to produce at the time, Sega still found itself in the hole. By some accounts, every Dreamcast owner would have had to purchase the game twice for Sega to recoup that investment.
入り口に一人だろう。レジは井上にやってもらって。何か忘れてないかな。
Sony's Japanese launch of the PlayStation 2 in March of 2000 did the Dreamcast no favors. Game selection took a backseat as many Japanese consumers were buying a PlayStation 2 simply because it was the cheapest DVD player available. The American launch of the PlayStation 2 was just as devastating. Even though the consoles were in short supply and the launch library was unimpressive, many consumers were dead set on getting one, opting to wait it out rather than give up and go home with a cheaper Dreamcast. Sega Enterprises chairman and then president Isao Okawa had long championed the idea of the company exiting the hardware market to focus solely on games. Sega began eyeing outside platforms, mostly PDAs and handhelds like Nintendo's Game Boy Advance, and by the end of January 2001, Sega made that fateful announcement. The Dreamcast would be discontinued with final units being slashed to $50. There would be no follow-up. After 18 years, Sega was no longer in the hardware business. Even though there were new games coming out for the Dreamcast until 2002, Sega wasted no time getting to work on software for their former competitors. One of their first games as a third-party company was a port of Choo Choo Rocket for Nintendo's Game Boy Advance. Before long, many Sega games began trickling over to Sony's PlayStation 2, including the trippy on-rail shooter Rez, albeit without the sex toy, modernized versions of Altered Beast and Shinobi, the Space Channel 5 games, and Virtua Fighter 4, to name a few. Sega's Dreamcast wasn't around long enough to compete with Microsoft's Xbox or Nintendo's GameCube, and indeed, Sega was providing support to the consoles almost immediately upon their respective launches. While the GameCube got the cute and infuriatingly difficult Super Monkey Ball games, among others, the Xbox played host to exclusives like Panzer Dragoon Orta and Shenmue 2, Electric Boogaloo. And of course, there were plenty of Sonic games to go around for all to enjoy. The Hedgehog even started appearing in games alongside Mario, culminating in a spot on the Smash Bros. Roster starting with 2008's Brawl. But having lived through that brutal 16-bit war, seeing Sonic and Mario sipping tea together still seems somewhat remarkably alien to me. Sega's graceful exit from the hardware market didn't exactly solve their financial woes. The company experienced 5 straight years of net losses from 1998 to 2002. Their net income never reached the peak of their 16-bit apex. Only thanks to a generous $900 million contribution from Isao Okawa's own fortune did the company manage to avoid bankruptcy. In 2004, the Sammy Corporation, a Japanese manufacturer of pachinko and slot machines, purchased a controlling stake in Sega. The merged entity became known as Sega Sammy Holdings. Sega and Sammy operate independently as subsidiaries under it. The Sega of today is far removed from the gaming powerhouse of decades past. Their once thriving arcade division had taken a hit in Japan, and their software output has not been terribly robust. Due to declining sales of traditional software, Sega has shifted more of their focus to digital delivery of games, especially for the lucrative mobile device market. You could blame the Dreamcast's demise and their eventual exit from the hardware market on several factors: poor timing, the loss of some major third-party support, customer distrust over previous hardware debacles, piracy. But the insurmountable dilemma for Sega was the inability to adapt to a perpetually changing market. Sony and Microsoft were changing the rules of the game, especially considering they had deep enough pockets not only to market the hell out of their consoles, but also weather the storm that comes from selling cutting-edge consoles overflowing with features at a significant loss. Sega simply couldn't compete with them. Nintendo, meanwhile, remains in the game owing to their wildly popular and exclusive roster of characters, while selling their hardware, lighter on horsepower, heavier on gimmicks, at a slight profit. Plus, they really nailed that whole portable gaming thing. Sega's hardware days being referred to strictly in the past tense hasn't stopped fans from holding their breath for a release of a Dreamcast 2, complete with HDMI output, backwards compatibility, internal storage, and 4K resolution, just to highlight a few actual unrealistic requests. While his enthusiasm for a Sega console would have come in handy back in 2000 when it would have counted, I could understand the wistfulness. The original Dreamcast died during the honeymoon phase, a time when there was waves of newcomers just getting acquainted with its wonderful library. The console gave the players what they wanted, and it said goodbye long before anyone could grow tired of it. But if you've been paying attention these past couple of episodes, you know why it's just never going to happen. And what good would it do anyway? We still have the games and the franchises that defined Sega throughout the years. They're just no longer tied down to a single brand of hardware. And in a way, isn't that better? Besides, the Dreamcast never really died. There's still a thriving homebrew community keeping it alive with new titles, much of which was possible thanks to the console's lackluster anti-piracy measures. This was Dave for TeeVee Games. As always, please remember to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.